Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Normally say morning because he's normally running in the morning. Welcome to the 15th episode of SecuriTEA and Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Uh, Today, I'm delighted to have Neil, and I also never asked how to pronounce your last name, but I'm going to try. And if I got it wrong, let me know. Matatall, is that right? Or
I really don't. You can pronounce it however you want. My handles on other platforms are a misspelling of it. It's kind of just funny to hear people try.
okay.
But Matatall would be the way I would say it.
Matatall. Okay, Matatall on the show. Neil is a seasoned engineer and security professional who's worked in the industry for over 16 years. Notably, Neil has worked at Twitter and GitHub as an individual contributor and also transitioned to a senior management position. Neil has been heavily involved in static analysis and helped build the Ruby on Rails scanner Brakeman Security. Neil is the founder or one of the co-organizers or co-founders of Locomocosec conference. Welcome, Neil. Welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me. Just quick point of clarification. Justin wrote Breakman. Like I
So
was involved, but he was the person who wrote Breakman. I was involved in Breakman Pro, which was kind of like the second business addition to it. So just want to make sure that's very clear because yes, like there's a common misconception that I wrote Breakman. Just want to make sure that's clear.
no, I said help build. So
You did,
yeah,
but
so
it
yeah,
was Justin.
Justin. Okay, Justin. So if you haven't seen Justin's previous Twitch stream or series, definitely go check that out. We did talk quite a lot about Breakman and the business side. We're not here today to that, but obviously great to have Neil here. So Neil, you live in Hawaii. That's correct, right?
Correct.
Thank you. So my Twitter research has always been normally on point. So I remember you tweeted quite a while ago that it sucks for packages to get delivered to where you live. Has that improved? Is that still terrible?
It absolutely has improved. Um, so there's a couple of reasons why it can be difficult. One, obviously, there's this big ocean in between that tends to make deliveries a little bit more difficult. Two, like the distance, just the distance alone, it's 2,500 miles to the nearest coast. And then it's kind of a third aspect to it is the streets around here are not grids, and they definitely are not easy to find. And Google Maps will not get you to my house. So if it's a new delivery person, there's a chance it might not come here, but we did get an Amazon warehouse on Oahu, so if it's a common enough item to be stored there, you can actually get it next day. I was really shocked. I did get a next day delivery earlier this week, but I don't really pay attention to the delivery because I don't actually know if it's going to be overnight, 2 weeks, anything in between. So I just kind of don't pay attention, and as things arrive, it's kind of like little gifts from me from the past. It's nice.
It's kind of like a Bob Ross moment. It kind of feels like. Okay, cool. And obviously, I saw you around Kona. I only know Kona Brewing, but what are the types of things that people might want to go do if they like ever come to your wonderful island? Like some hotspots that people might not know from just Googling.
I'd probably try to talk them out of it because, being frank, like from a visitor's perspective, Um, it's not very universally liked. So if you like scuba diving and fishing, great spot. If you like hiking, amazing. But if you want kind of like a nightlife or like walkable things or activities for kids, the nearest white sand beach is not that far from me, but also it's not very like and in California you can have miles and miles and miles of white sand beach, and then you won't see a single rock. And in Hawaii, at least on the Big Island, almost all these beaches are pretty rocky, whether it's at the shore or right underneath the water. So, not a good place to like learn how to surf, for example. um, at least if you value avoiding concussions and whatnot. But I love this island. I'm the kind of person who loves to hike. Also, coffee here is pretty good. It's Mark Twain even wrote about it. He thought it was so good. Uh,
Okay.
it's like kind of like a protected resource around here where you can't call something Kona coffee unless it meets like a certain level of actual Kona coffee, which unfortunately is only 10%. So it's not a very good classification, but because of that, places will advertise 100% Kona coffee, just as a way to separate them from regular Kona coffee.
Okay, I actually learned something new today. That's amazing. Cool. So let's keep to the Hawaiian theme. So as you know, like in the introduction, I mentioned Locomocosec. So you've been involved with Locomocosec for a while. Can you tell me a little bit of what you do as an organizer there?
So for this year, I'm kind of taking a step back and letting someone else kind of be point on this. So my role is basically just limited to the things that were more of a pain in the butt to transfer to somebody else than to actually handle myself. So this year, it's kind of reduced down to just setting up Eventbrite and paying bills.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm still going to be involved in like the CFP, and it did have some ideas on venues. And I'll still be around, but certainly the first 2 years were much more involved, and we kind of had like a few false starts. We've been talking about doing this for ages, and it's myself, Jim Manico, Jeremiah Grossman, and Ron Paris, and it was really hard for all four of us to have time at the same time, and we kept waiting for that moment. And eventually, it was just kind of like, you know what, I have the time, I have the energy. I'm just gonna plow forward. What do you guys think? Okay, we'll be along for the ride. And I did, I don't want to discount the help I had because we did have some volunteers, and the founders were available for some things, but it was like almost everything fell onto me. And we tried to run it as a very lean conference, so the idea of like hiring people to help was out of the question.
Gotcha.
Um, and kind of in retrospect, I think that was a huge mistake. Um, it might not have cost that much more money to get a little bit more help, such that it would have taken a lot of these things away from me. And I'm not saying like I did a bad job with them, but I made mistakes. I would book people's hotels for the wrong day because if they're coming from Europe, I forgot that there's actually, a big enough time difference there that dates really matter. I made a few typos on the website, or I made a few like you couldn't buy tickets for some period of time, which was hilarious just because I got the Eventbrite settings wrong. So the second year was a lot better. I had a lot more help. I was able to fully delegate a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's still just kind of a little bit too much. And I really enjoyed it. And when you're actually at the day of the event, you kind of forget all that stuff for a while. Um, and it's just really such a good experience.
Cool. So,
But so
the,
for this year, sorry, we are hiring a company to manage all the logistics
mhm.
so that we don't have to focus on the things that we're not good at. So, like I said, I'm just going to be focusing on the CFP this year.
It's also still a lot of time and effort that you have to take into reviewing each each one that comes in. So I can definitely understand that. And I'm guessing like this obviously probably came to pass in the past because you were on the mainland. Is that kind of like, or like in the area kind of thing compared to everyone else is probably like in the US or greater US kind of thing? Or
So I don't quite follow the question there.
oh, I mean, like, was it because obviously you kind of did it? You said that you did like a lot of the components to begin with, like setting up and all that kind of stuff. Was that
Mhm.
because that you were like closer to the event space?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, think that's a good point. Three of us were living in Hawaii at the time, but
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I was. We chose to do it on the Big Island. We did it in Kona the first year. Uh, Absolutely, because it was the most affordable, and we wanted to start small sort of deal. So yeah, the first venue is about a 25-minute drive from me. So I could easily go on site and things like that. But there's a lot more that comes to running a conference.
Yeah.
Obviously, you talked about the CFP. I kind of mentioned Eventbrite is a big thing. You have to create a business. If you're not going to do it under someone else's banner, there's that too. So you have to set up all the financial stuff and all the other stuff that just comes with every business. And we wanted to. I don't know if we had recordings. We did have recordings from the first year, I think, but it was just screen capture.
Hmm.
But you want to put attention into quality too. Like I've been to a lot of conferences, and I have a lot of opinions on conferences. I think we'll probably get into that a little bit later, but quality was certainly something I wanted to really focus on, and I didn't want to just do a cash grab. I didn't want to do like just another conference X, where they have these conferences all over the place all the time. I want it to be different. I want it to be ours, and I want it to be unique. And we are not the first security conference in Hawaii, but one of the first.
Gotcha. Cool. So I understand that maybe one thing that's quite different to Locomocosec, even though it's probably been done before, but like you're just a single track conference, and do you think the single track conference is a better format for conferences than I've been to many conferences where it's like a 3-track one where you don't you want to go see two talks at the same time. You get stuck at HallCon, for example, because you're going between those things. Would you say the one track one is better compared to multi track?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of strong opinions, I will declare as long as I'm involved with Locomocosec, it will be a single track. Um, There's a lot of reasons for that. So I'll start kind of like with the positive is I went to Enigma conference, I don't know, 4 years ago. Amazing conference, great content, really, really well run. And it was literally what I wanted to model Locomocosec off of, at least like to some degree. I think they took a few things a little bit further than we did, but just having everyone in the same room meant that everyone had the same experience. Maybe they didn't attend a talk, but at least they didn't have someone who maybe would have enjoyed talking about the same presentation, but the two of you went to different ones. And now you're kind of, it's not that you can't talk about it, but, instead of which talk did you go to, it's like, which talk was your favorite? Or what do you think about this talk? Because you can almost safely assume that someone was there. Um, but again, HoloCon is pretty useful regardless of the size.
Yep.
So kind of focusing on the negative, like, yeah, like I went to RSA when I was very young, and I thought that's just how conferences were. And then kind of went to some of the smaller OWASP, and I was like, okay, this is a little bit more my speed. But even like 4 tracks is three too many. Like we already talked about the conflict of seeing two talks or just kind of not having the same story, but like I don't want to say that the quality goes down, but I have been in a situation where we were literally filling slots instead of choosing speakers.
I see.
Um, we had this was not Locomocus. This was a different event many years ago, and it was like we had 64 slots and 70 proposals that were on topic. So the acceptance rate was pretty high, and I'm not saying that the sort of, I guess we call it, the tail end wasn't quality presenters, but I do think that it would have been better to condense things. Now you run into things with capacity. I kind of like the small events. So if you sell out, you sell out instead of like, okay, let's put some chairs around the outside of the room. I have seen like overflow rooms work out kind of well, but um, I definitely didn't want to make it an event where like the number of tickets was the primary driver, but more just kind of like the quality of the event. And
The
we're
one
never in it to make money. We never, we haven't made any money, so we're not trying to get rich here. We're just trying to put together a good event.
Gotcha. Yeah, the one thing that really resonated with me is like everyone having the same experience, and that's actually like quite like a, it's quite more intimate, and obviously you get, that might even build like better relationships with people because they're having like similar interests or different discussions around the same topics, rather than you go to like the buffet room and you say like, did you go see this talk? And they say no, and you go cool, and then you move on, kind of thing. That's definitely happened to me a few times, and I think that having that more kind of like ability to connect with people early on is very very powerful. Um,
Yeah. I mean, if I'm gonna to pile onto that, like asking what talk did you go to is kind of a hard question if you know that there's like a 1 in 4 chance that they are gonna say no. So it's like kind of, to an introvert, I do think it is a little more welcoming as well because they don't have to ask whether or not you went to a topic in a risky way. It's like maybe you're in the hallway call, maybe you went back to your room, like that's fine, but like there's a good chance you saw the same talk. So it's a little more welcoming in that way.
got it. Yeah, definitely.
Really drilling this point home, I think.
Yeah, 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 definitely. So I think we're on the same point there. We're gonna keep on brand for a while before we move into like your history and stuff. But there's one more thing I want to discuss, and I'm gonna paste it into the Twitch chat, and it'll also be on the YouTube descriptions too. So you started, a long time ago, maybe feel like you're the 70 people that have been interested in it, as you've said before, that you started a TikTok series where you talked about the content security policy. I've seen a few things come up in here and there, but can we expect more of your thought leadership slash memership with this space?
Membership. I think it might be done with, and it was way more difficult than I thought it would be. And I think part of that is also like my personality. I was kind of struggling between like providing good content versus like accidentally overproducing something, and kind of that conflict was a little hard for me to balance. And um, I think another important part of having like at least an active TikTok account is kind of consistent like content creation. And so if I'm just doing one every like 19 days, that's not a very good formula for success on TikTok from what I can tell. But mainly like I'm an elder millennial. I like technology. I grew up with technology, but I don't think I know how to use TikTok as well as a lot of people because with the quality of things that I've seen and kind of knowing what it would take to get there, ooh, like I'm not sure I can invest that much time and effort. Um, And kind of the same thing, like I'm not a perfectionist, like I can accept small flaws, but as I'm like reviewing these things, like, oh, I need to go back and re-record that part, or like, is it going to bother me enough to just to let it go? And so I only joined TikTok because when I was very young, uh, AOL Instant Messenger came out, and you know, not everyone had internet, so not everyone was using it, and the concept was kind of weird to me. Like if I wanted to talk to a friend, I could just kind of call them, assuming the line wasn't busy. But then I go to college, and I don't have anyone's screen name. I don't even have an account, and everybody I know is talking to all their friends back home or across the country through AOL Instant Messenger, and I just felt like an idiot for resisting it. I probably did something childish enough as like saying it was stupid or that people who used it like are weird or something. And here I am like crawling back, like, "Will you be my friend on AOL, please?" So from that point on, I decided like I'm gonna jump on every technology, at least for my own opinion, before I start like using it more or not using it. I think Twitter was another example of that. I wasn't the first user of Twitter, but I was an early user of Twitter, and certainly InfoSec Twitter at the time was pretty small.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying you have to have a Twitter account to be an InfoSec, but it is pretty helpful.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. Like, there's a lot of times where I've seen like, I was like looking at AngularJS, let's say like as a topic, and then suddenly all these AngularJS bypasses suddenly started to come out, and it helped like my actual job, like what I was trying to do. Like I knew that there was a vulnerability here, but I couldn't bypass the sandbox, and then suddenly there was a new one for like 5.9. So like I definitely have loved like the ability there, and obviously like you get like a lot of like interesting trends and like seeing things normally before they crop up, which is quite nice. Because obviously everyone shares the same things normally as well when you get that type of collection. I think I kind of resonate with you in the sense that content creation, from what I've seen, is really hard. Like I tried to do this podcast, and it's really hard to like maintain on a schedule. And then I tried to make a YouTube video once where it was like introducing OWASP, and it's only a 10-minute video, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Like I was like, oh my god, this is crazy. Like I kept trying to record it, and then a car would come past, and I would like have to re-record it because that now the sound's buoyant on that individual thing, and then you're trying to get it to sync up with everything. It's just insane. So I totally understand. I haven't like everyone keeps telling me to get on TikTok, and I still haven't done it. But would you say is there any kind of collaboration efforts you might want to do to keep the script source none alive? Because I feel I've seen a few people who have done like security TikToks, and I think CSP is a really complex topic in general. I think yours was kind of like, going through like kind of talking about bad CSP policies, but maybe it could be like a platform where people could contribute and potentially, maybe, share, the CSP world, like information to the world.
Yeah. Certainly like if you ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. So if people ask me things on there, I will respond with like a thorough answer. And, that kind of stuff isn't prone to me overanalyzing whether or not it's overproduced or not, because I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff. But um, if somebody wants to take it over, I would more than be happy to be like kind of someone you bounce ideas off of, something you verify, someone who can give you ideas as well. But creating the videos themselves, that's just so hard. And the security community on TikTok, I'm not claiming that I know all of it, but it's fairly small. Um, we're talking maybe dozens of people that I've found.
Yeah.
Not that I found everyone, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be catching on yet, and maybe that'll change in the future. And I do think it benefits from a lot of interaction, and I'm sure people who don't have a TikTok account or have only spent a few minutes on it think it's just people dancing around and trends and random sounds and computer generated voices. But I do think there's some pretty good content on there as well.
Yeah. I mean, I use it to like, I always get like references all the time, and it just makes me laugh. So it's quite nice. And the one thing I will say is that I think, from what I've been looking at the HackerOne reports, and I think, it's quite interesting to see these new social media platforms pop up, because the amount of like vulnerabilities that crop up because people are, writing code and pushing fast kind of thing is quite interesting. The amount of systemic XSS that was happening that I've been seeing on like various different components of TikTok is quite interesting. But I know you've already
Hey,
given lots. Yeah,
I'm moving away from security.
I know, I know, I know, I know. Speaking of security, let's talk about your job history. So, you've worked at various different organizations over the years as a developer and also security engineer. Can you talk about that journey? Like just kind of give a brief overview of where you started, and where you are today.
Sure. The first kind of time I wrote some code, I knew that that was what I was going to be doing in the future. Luckily, my high school class offered a C++ class, and so I went into college, and I graduated with a computer science degree. But I was interning at the basically the organization that runs the internal computing for the entire campus. So like the payroll department, the admissions department, like they need sort of web applications. When I graduated, they kind of said, well, your internship role really only counts kind of as like a half full time role, and we don't have another allocation for that team, but we do have a half allocation for this team, and that team happened to be security. Um, One of my first tasks was kind of to come up with a training course based on the OWASP top 10. So kind of it was one of those like learn by teaching sort of deals. Um, and I think, yeah, like the first time I like manually triggered like a CSRF vulnerability or like some kind of, to me complex at the time thing, it was like, okay, I could do this for a while. So I spent some time in security, and then I was like, I miss writing code. So I went back to writing code, and then someone said, hey, what if you could do like security and code? I said, that sounds interesting. So then I didn't do any coding. I just did more security. Um,
Yeah.
to be fair, I don't think I stuck around enough to really kind of get the full experience. But yeah, the first thing I did there was manage Splunk, which is not coding. I still enjoyed my time there. So again, back to engineering. I went back to my university again. Worked for a different department. Kind of really enjoyed my time there, but didn't really think it was going to work out a long time. Kind of not the best technology to grow with. And then at that point, I tried consulting in InfoSec, and I did not like it at all. Talk about no ability to code. It is the furthest thing from writing code. Um, and I think I lasted 9 weeks. After that, I got in touch with an old friend, Alex Mullen, who was working at Twitter at the time. And he knew that I kind of been working with Rails. I think there was another like development and engineering switch or development and security switch along the way. And he said once again, like it's a security role where you're going to write code, and I've kind of like I've heard that before. Like when you say write code, like what percentage of the time will I be writing code? And it's kind of like, well, if you want to, 100%. So that sounded great. Um, Obviously, working at Twitter was fun in its own way. Lots of complications, but I learned so much, and I worked with so many great people. Not that the people I didn't work with before, but it was the first time I actually stuck around at a company. So I was there for almost 3 years, and to me, that was an impossibility. 2 years is like when you switch jobs, right? Three is like, I mean, what are you doing? um, and so at that point, I kind of started talking to some people in GitHub, and kind of they wanted to expand their security team, and I started working there. Again, they offered an opportunity to do security and code, and for a majority of that, I would say it was true. There was definitely like a 3 year span where I was writing code all day, every day, and it was probably my favorite part of my entire career. But eventually, the stuff I was working on got passed off to another team. Kind of the roles of what you're doing in security kind of changed, and then kind of the work I was doing was getting further and further away from writing code. Um, so I know this wasn't part of the question, but
Oh, it's
that's
great.
kind of why I've drifted kind of away from security. I think you know time and time again I've had security roles that had temporarily provided that need, but I just want to write code full time. So I'm switching out of security for a little while, maybe forever.
Got it. So, yeah, I obviously you said you were in consulting for like less 7, was it 7?
I think it was about 9 weeks. Yeah.
9, yeah, 9 weeks. Well, I did it for 6.5 years, so I understand. I understand the no coding aspect. It basically is just doing security type work, and you get to write scripts here and there, but I would say like 80-90% of my time was basically just doing different maybe like reviewing code or doing security testing or threat modeling, etc. All very critical components. That's I definitely resonate with some people definitely want to have the more hands-on kind of stuff. So obviously you're hope maybe moving away from security full time kind of thing. But let's talk about some of the work at Twitter. So you worked on a team which was generally around static analysis. And it was like a project called SADB, or I'm not sure if there was like a different way to pronounce that. Could you talk about that type of stuff that you were doing there?
Yeah. So it's pronounced SADB, and
SADB.
security automation dashboard, I think was the name of it. Um, Not static analysis, security automation, because that was like the name of our team.
Hmm.
And that's kind of why I believed them when they said I'd be writing code all day. So I kind of was hired before Justin, and I kind of was tasked with somebody else's kind of idea to integrate Brakeman into the workflows, because they'd started using Brakeman and they had a lot of results and they had a lot of fixes. They kind of still had a lot of results. Um, this was post, the FTC injunction or whatever they put upon Twitter that said like you must do security better, sort of thing. Um, but the idea was kind of like, okay, every team has a way that they deploy code, and every team has more or less standardized on actually running tests before they deploy things. This is 10 years ago, so like
Yeah.
the idea of CI/CD was still kind of like, okay, cool guys can do it, but it's not like, now it's kind of like, why would you do anything differently?
Yep.
Um, so, we thought there is a central place for that every team, it's not the same place, but there is a process for doing something. So let's try to see if we can integrate with the deploy flow. And um, that we knew it would be problematic. So we had like 9 different Rails applications. So that meant 9 different automation solutions. There was no standardization across the applications. Yes, they were all Rails. Some of them were on different versions. Some of them deployed this way. Some of them did that way. Some used Jenkins. Some used this like homegrown server thing that they built. So yeah, it was 9 bespoke implementations, and you know, the question is, what do you do if there's new findings? Do you block the deploy? Do you fail the deploy? Do you ask somebody if they want to continue the deploy anyways? Like, and at that point, like, what are you really accomplishing if you're not sort of like tracking these opt-outs, or if it's actually not stopping anyone from doing things? And failing a deploy is like, you don't do that. Like, that just makes people so mad. They work so hard to get this thing out, and all of a sudden, what is this stupid tool telling me I can't deploy for? I need to get this out today. God forbid there's like a vulnerability and all of a sudden we can't deploy the code because the tool is telling me it's bad. Um, it was kind of a problem. So with some applications, we went to the blocking mode, and sure enough, they circumvented it eventually. Um, so we weren't really reducing the number of vulnerabilities. We weren't systematically attacking them in any way, and the number of results only went up. So I can't remember who originally had the idea. I want to say it was either Alex or Justin. But they kind of said we have a bunch of implementations that are all custom. They're not very effective because they can just be bypassed, and I don't think anyone's actually even reading the results. Like, I think they're just hitting yes every time. So what is the value of this thing? And then there were other issues like, it was most convenient to just sort of add Brakeman to their dependencies. Some people did not like that. Brakeman has transitive dependencies. Brakeman might have dependency conflicts with other things. It's kind of a big problem. So the idea was to find a place where everybody actually goes through in a consistent way, pushing to Git, for example, and then kind of, nobody really reads the output of a push to Git. So like, we didn't think that was a good place to integrate or anything, and certainly wouldn't have known how. Um, and while a lot of people did use Jenkins, not everyone did. So standardizing on Jenkins was kind of also not the route we did. So kind of a separate process that watches all incoming commits. I will then scan it sort of asynchronously, compare it to sort of the previous results, do a diff, see what results are new. And if you see any new results, we'd send an email. Um, Now, we didn't use GitHub at the time. We definitely could have integrated with the review system we had, but we felt email was the right approach because the culture at Twitter was to use email. We didn't use issue
Hmm.
comments. Yes, we had Jira and stuff, but a lot of conversations happened over email. So you could expect people to see these results coming in, and then hopefully they can act upon them as well. And we did start seeing people going like, "Whoa, well, what is this? Can I learn more about it?" So we provide a link so that they could open it up and try to be like a self-service manner, or like, "Holy cow! Like, what is this tool? I've never seen it. I always click yes." People started like paying attention, and there was a little bit of a gamification aspect to it too, because if you fix the vulnerability, we'd also send you an email like, "Good job." And we finally had a centralized place where we were tracking all the results over time. We had an option before, but it was like a Jenkins job that just like pulled down all the applications, ran Brakeman, published the results in a known place, and we would like iframe them in. It was a very like that was the original solution and it worked, but having an actual application where we could sort of track things over time in a centralized place was great. And we try to add things to it as well. We built in a very rudimentary header scanner, so like securityheaders.io, yeah, a
Yep.
very basic version of that we built. And there was a few other projects that integrated it as well that didn't really provide as much value. But the idea was for that to be the centralized place that even executives could get value from.
The one thing that kind of, I think hit the nail on the head on how people need to approach it these days is like we're doing it via email because that's the way that Twitter worked, right? So that's basically thinking in a developer first, experience and mentality, because, they're not going to look in other places where they don't need to. No one's going to go and look at a dashboard if it's not in their current pipeline. So I think that's really important. And did you just choose that solution as email because of that? Or were you always just frankly trying to find like just the way it would work? Or
Um, to be honest, I think the reason we chose email was because it was the easiest and it would work. Sort of later in my tenure there, we started integrating with the review system a little more, and I think had SADB been built then, it would have integrated with the review system.
Mhm.
Um, and for all I know, eventually it did. I'm not sure.
Gotcha.
I
Yeah,
would love to know if SADB is still running, or if they've moved to something else.
if anyone from Twitter is watching this or watching the VOD, please let Neil know. Uh, so I want to talk about a few things as well. So obviously you went to GitHub after Twitter. Can you talk about the transition from Twitter to GitHub? I do remember reading your blog, and I believe like GitHub integrated something about Twitter, and then I don't know if that was your decision maker, but I would love to like hear it from your side, like how that kind of happened.
Yeah, sure. I had been talking to GitHub for probably like a year and a half before I made the switch, and it's just like I didn't think it was the right time, and um, they would kind of periodically reach out to me every once in a while, and then again, I don't remember the timing of things, but I was definitely still a Twitter employee, and Twitter had released what they called cards. So back in the day, tweets used to just be tweets, and now, if you put a link, it'll expand it. And if you put specific like open graph tags on the page, Twitter will read those and then use that to display like rich information. So GitHub mentioned that they had added support for Twitter cards, via those tags, and they could have chosen any repo on the internet. They could have chosen Rails, for example. They were big fans of Rails, but the blog post they chose to choose a library that I wrote, and I don't know if that was like intentional or if this was like a back door to try to like get me flattered into a job, but it worked. I definitely felt like that was a good like gesture. Um, I'm pretty sure it wasn't a random coincidence, but who knows? I never actually asked because I don't really want to make it seem like I was flattered into a job. But I do think like especially in this job search that I've been like I think it really matters like how much they appear to want you, because like some of these opportunities, are it's like so you're security, huh? Like you're a manager, right? Like can you even write code? Or like okay, you've worked at these places, but like why do you want to work here? It's like well, like I mean I'm here, right? Like I'm giving you my time. Like sure I can write an essay if you'd like, but like do you not want to be here? Do you not want me to be here? Like, let's talk this out. So some of the opportunities that I'm talking to now, again, they didn't flatter me into a job, but it helps.
Totally got it. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, when I was interviewing, like towards the end of the year last year, I got those types of questions, and I would always just say like, "Well, I know this person, and they work here, and like they have made massive impact in the places I've worked in the past, or I know that they do good work, and if I can do anything of like the same rigor as them, then I definitely want to be part of this team." So that was the way that I kind of always saw that, and then yeah, definitely. If people could flatter me, just like someone once during an interview mentioned like some of the stuff I had worked on in the past, and I was like, oh, they're actually like paying attention about me, kind of thing. Like, oh, that's so nice. So totally get it. Um, we are going to talk about some job stuff, and we'll move on to that very quickly. But the one thing that there's a few things about the GitHub time, and I will just going back to the consulting thing, we had one comment from the Twitch stream which said 30% waiting for credentials in the environment, 20% actual testing, 30% report writing, and 20% calls, which I unfortunately definitely have had those pains. But let's get back to where we were. So at GitHub, so you obviously there's already been two wonderful podcasts recently where they've talked about different engineering aspects that you've done, especially about content security policy. I'm not going to, ask you the questions that everyone else has already asked you, but I would like to know more about some of the features you may have integrated at GitHub. I obviously, do my snooping, and I saw on your LinkedIn that you built a Ruby client that integrated into the bug bounty platform. I could imagine just from I've seen how people implement things in the past, that it's normally a really, important process to fix because it very time consuming, causes a lot of pain, especially for your developers and also the people that are reviewing. So I would love to know about your experience of building that out and what it kind of helped with.
Sure. So GitHub was definitely an early adopter of the bug bounty program in general. I would even at Twitter, I even cited, GitHub has one, like Facebook has one, like why can't we have one? Um, and I always kind of like respected it, and then sort of I never interacted with it, but I knew it existed. I knew that they had a website devoted to it. It was an email inbox, but like it was a little more thought out. And then after I joined, I was like, wow, like they use consistent language in almost all communication. They really go out of their way to like make the reporter feel welcome and wanted because repeat bounty research reports are the best, um, especially if you can establish a long-term relationship. We would even like, fly some of our bounty people out. There's a lot of attention put to it, but the process was still essentially an email inbox. And that was okay when there was like three people. And then I was added as a fourth. And I think that's when things started to break down. Um, there's a lot of kind of, I think, insignificant steps along the way that were kind of like process driven, but to kind of like just summarize the state of things, um, you know, whoever saw the report first would typically respond to it. So if I've got a coworker on the East Coast and I'm in Hawaii, like I'm not really doing my part here. Most of the reports are there when I wake up in the morning.
Sure.
We had this weird reason to like keep code names on things because we didn't want like email titles to leak, sensitive information. But that just made it really hard to track. Like, hey, are you working on Blue Diamond or the water bottle? And it's like, I don't know. And we started to get a backlog, and then it made everything worse. And eventually, I was like, all right, like we need to come up with a standardized plan. Let's rotate the bounty submissions every week. Let's put it on a PagerDuty schedule so it's automatic. Let's stop with these code names. Let's let people supply the titles. Um, and let's keep doing what we did, and that definitely helped, but it eventually came to a point where it's like, well, how much money have we paid out? Well, I don't know. Ask accounting, like they might have a good idea. Or like, what are our biggest problems? Like, I don't know, like last week we had that thing, so frequency bias would tell me that's the biggest problem. It was just kind of a mess. So I'd used HackerOne at Twitter, and I don't think that was the reason why we went with HackerOne. But one nice thing that HackerOne was selling us on, and I don't know that it was unique at the time either, was that they had an API. Um, it wasn't public at the time, but I don't think we were also the first consumers of it. But we did have early access to it, and it kind of gave us an opportunity to like really see if it's going to work out from us. Because while GitHub did not suffer from not invented here, like we did build our own products from time to time, but it was mostly like if your website sucks, we don't want to use it. If your website is awful, but you have an API, like that's good. Like we'll take care of that. We'll figure out how to make it work. So the HackerOne API, we took a look at it. We definitely worked with them, made some changes, suggested some things. They added product features for us. They wanted us as a customer, and I really enjoyed working with them. And I don't keep opinions to myself, so it was very very high bandwidth communication there. And calling an API is not rocket science, but if you can just write regular Ruby code to wrap all that behind it, great. Um, it's a pretty simple wrapper, and it did kind of like some of the aspects of our specific to our bounty program did kind of bleed into the gem a little bit, but not really. Um, but it made it so I could go an entire week on the on-call schedule and never log into HackerOne once, but still fully manage the program entirely through chat ops. You know, bounty, report ID, close as spam. Bounty report ID, let them know I'm investigating. Bounty report ID, pay out this amount of money. And so we had a checklist that was like 15 items. And it got reduced to like two, and yeah, just really streamlined everything. And I know Shopify has also built some sort of platform that uses the gem and the API, and it sounds like there's way more advanced than GitHub's, but GitHub's culture says chat ops are king. So they built like an actual application with like management capabilities and a UI, and I was really impressed by that. So, basically like because of the requirements of our culture, it dictated kind of what product we could use. And I'm so happy it worked out. It saved us so much time. And we had metrics.
Finally, yeah, metrics definitely like they require. I think they're definitely always needed, and sometimes people make a lot of decisions when they don't actually have the information. And when you can finally start showing this information in a very like easy to consume manner, it also helps generally like lead to bigger decisions to be made from like more senior kind of leadership as well. So kind of love that.
Can you give me like one moment? It's
Yep.
getting a little warm in here, so I need to make some adjustments.
No, you're all good. Anyone got any questions in the stream while he's away? See if I can play some music until he gets back. He's back. Okay. Awesome. So can you hear me still good?
Yep.
Awesome. So I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you, but obviously I want to be conscious of time and also get to the job hunting side of things. There's one last question I'm going to ask around GitHub, and obviously if you have any other questions around like, there was some things I was going to ask about like automating and like trying to choose like business buy-in and stuff, but if you have any questions around that, I'm sure you could message Neil separately. So you were at GitHub for 7 years. It's a very long time, and obviously you mentioned earlier like 3 years. Oh my god, kind of thing at Twitter. It's definitely like a long stint, and you were there like in the early days, pre Microsoft acquisition, pre kind of thing. I would love to know how things evolved over time for you, and obviously what you can talk about. I'm sure there's some NDA stuff there, but if there's anything you can talk about from like the early days into the new days and your time from transitioning from an IC to a manager kind of thing, that would be quite awesome to hear.
Yeah. So honestly, GitHub is pretty supportive of us kind of talking openly about things. Obviously, there's some things that are going to be a little bit off limits, but kind of along those lines, I'm doing another talk next Sunday, and I reached out to GitHub. I'm like, I'm literally going to show the schema of the application and the SQL queries being used. Like, is that divulging too much information? And like, no, the secret's not in the implementation. So
Awesome.
I love the default to openness sort of there, but so obviously GitHub's culture had been in the news a little bit before joining. GitHub was kind of under a transformation stage where, like real managers had just become a thing not too long ago, but it's still a situation where like nobody had titles, like everyone was just on the same level there. And kind of I jokingly describe it as it was a bunch of hippies in a drum circle. Like there wasn't a lot of organization. There was kind of just like go do what makes you happy. Like there were like teams were a new thing as well. And while I'm not a kind of person who likes to wear a suit to work, but like I do like a little bit more sort of structure and consistency. Um, GitHub likes to say GitHub uses GitHub to build GitHub. That was not true. Like some teams used Trello, some teams used Asana. There were Jira instances. I think there's even like a Bitbucket instance somewhere. But sort of as things went along, like we became more we grew up a little bit, we became a little bit more cohesive. But like leadership was still a little bit loose. The CEO like wasn't really around too much. I think we didn't have a CTO for like 3 years or something. So we kind of I think needed to grow up like another level. So brought in a CTO, and he definitely made a lot of good changes. A couple CTOs. I think we went through a few actually, and not all were great, but there's definitely like okay, like we're a real business. Like we need to start like really planning for a potential IPO or an acquisition, or if we're going to make this business private forever, like we got to nail this down. Um, and I had no idea the Microsoft acquisition was coming. It was a complete surprise to me. Um, Very weird time, of course. It's weird feelings that you don't really get too many times in your life. Um, but part of that was like, is Microsoft going to ruin us? There's a big concern about that. Are we going to have to like switch to C# and Azure tomorrow? I don't think that was like a real concern, but like that there's so things like that could have been on people's minds. So they acquired us. They installed a CEO. They installed some more like high level people. Like we absorbed a couple teams from Microsoft. Like Azure DevOps, I think came along pretty early on. So the company got bigger, it got a little bit more Microsoft-y, and it wasn't really a problem. Um, I think the CEO Nat was, he had lots of cred. I mean, he's big in the open source industry, and is a developer and cares about developers, and certainly didn't want to change what GitHub was doing too much. And on top of that, he did want to change a few things about what we did, but um, also listened. So like we used to keep all the GitHub meetings going back to 2012, I think. um, the meetings were recorded and we kept those forever. And he's like, I don't think that's valuable. After 2 weeks, the information could be wrong, could be misleading. But everyone's like, yeah, but like there was that one time where that one person made the joke and everyone laughed, or there was that one time where like this inside joke got established, or there was this one time where someone cried tears of joy, like genuinely. Like you can't erase that sort of stuff. Like that's our history, that's our culture. And he was like, you know what? I hear you. Stays around forever. And we're like, wow. Like not only did he kind of like acquiesce, but he like pointed out like I'm listening, I hear you, I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to sit here and dictate change. I thought that was really cool. Um, with Microsoft came, free Azure basically. So we had a lot of new resources available to us for free. If there was a problem, we just go knock on the door instead of trying to get in touch with our support reps. And I think it was a really positive thing, but it also just kind of, did kind of start feeling a little bit more like a typical enterprise type company.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. I love the story around it. It's kind of interesting because a lot of people probably wouldn't think about that. But if someone that's been at the company for so long and obviously has seen, those moments and stuff as well, it kind of like sets the tone, right? Joining a new company, you're not even going to think about that, and that's probably what when an acquisition happens, like let's get rid of all this old stuff. It's not needed. Let's go. Let's move forward. So totally got that. I'm going to ask one thing, and then we'll move on to the document, the job search, and we may go over time. If you have a hard stop.
I just want you to know I do have time, but I also want to respect your time too. So
I mean, as long as the viewers want to keep watching, we have 6 people watching right now. It's beautiful. So yeah, I want to know about any kind of life lessons you might be able to give. Obviously, you've been at Twitter, you've been at GitHub, you've worked, from startup to more enterprise level. Is there anything that you might want to share? And I know that you said you're moving away from being a security engineer and you want to just do IC like development work. Is there anything that you might want to give to the people, or just share any kind of knowledge around those components, like just in general?
I mean, I think general advice is kind of always be humble and don't try to be the smartest person in the room. Do more listening than speaking, but I think that's kind of like a general sort of advice. I'm not going to lie. When I started working from Twitter, like it felt weird. It felt good. It felt like, in a way, this is stupid because maybe I was a Twitter user early on, but I felt like a little bit internet famous. And I think even just kind of like to what level that is true is a separate thing entirely. But just kind of like having that sort of thought, I was just like not a good thing to sort of think about. And I don't think it really provided anything. So um, I think I definitely have had examples of behavior I'm not really proud of, but I always just try to like remind myself to stay humble and to learn from others and to never stop learning.
I think that's beautiful advice. So let's now move on to your current job search. And obviously, you've been blogging about this kind of stuff. I'm just going to remove my horrible face on the stream and show us the graph that you put on Twitter today. So obviously, you recently left GitHub. You're doing some fun employment. Doing some job searches. And I put on the stream, basically the approach that you took when you were looking for your new job. So obviously, a lot of this looks like it's from referrals. You had a couple of recruitment or application-based flows. But could you talk about like kind of your process right now for your interview process?
Yeah, sure. So the whole like fun employment thing, obviously it's not it's a well-known concept at this point, I think. But I was actually kind of inspired by Taylor Poindexter, I believe her name is, Engineering Bay on Twitter, because she kind of went through something like this earlier in the year. And while she has much more personality than I do, and probably knows a lot more about this than I do, it's like, oh, like I agree with that statement. That is a bold statement. That is not common in this industry. But you know what? I'm going to hold out for that too. So she really kind of inspired me to like really be picky about the place I go next. Every job up to this point was like I applied for the job I wanted to get and then I moved on, and this was a little bit different. cast a much wider net. And fortunately, like financially, I can do this. So it's not really an option for everyone, but I highly recommend it if you can. It can definitely be a little bit tiring to talk to 20 companies in this list, but not everything goes to a final interview. And like I said, some of them are a little bit smoother than others. One of those offers was basically like, "Hello, would you like to work here? I have an offer." So that was the shortest interviewing process I went through, but they certainly weren't all like that. Um, but kind of, like I said, I wasn't going to budge on the live coding exercise thing. Personally, I fall apart in those. I'm also going through a keyboard crisis right now. Like I can't get one that seems to make me happy, which would just make the potential to make a typo just go through the roof. And it's just not a good demonstration of my skills, nor is it an accurate reflection of work. But I do understand why it can be valuable to people who can't put 2 to 5 hours towards this. So I was very vocal about being anti live coding exercise, and now I'm being very vocal about you got to offer both. So places that didn't have a live coding exercise that I got to the end to, I was like, this worked for me, but I don't think it works for everyone. And I do think it's best to offer both if you really want to attract all the talent. And then in the process, I found out that most people actually prefer the live coding exercise. I don't think everyone has a strong opinion, but recruiters would tell me we used to do a coding exercise, we stopped, and the number of applications went through the roof. I was like, interesting. Not only am I the minority, but I think it's like bigger than I thought. So I'm preaching doing both at this point.
Sure. And obviously, the one thing I noticed here is like a lot of this comes from referrals themselves. So, is this primarily because you have like you've been working in the industry for a long time, you have a rather large like network of people that you've worked with, would want to work with again, or is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, a lot of these people are former coworkers, or people I've known through OWASP or things like that. And then that number is a little bit skewed because like there were 2 or 3 people that had a few that gave me a few opportunities.
Mhm.
So maybe there's maybe 8 unique people out of that list. Um, the referrers help, but what's going back to that whole like, bro, can you even code sort of thing? Like one of the opportunities I was most excited about, like I had 2 people in there that knew me. That one of them worked with me, and the other one like we've been in touch with Twitter for a decade. Not that that means much, but like I'm not some random person off the internet. Um, and they were just like, prove that you can code. Do this live coding exercise, or else like don't work here. And I was like, really? Like, can you make an accommodation? I always phrase it that way too, because I want to be clear. Like, me refusing to do a live coding exercise and them adapting to that
Mhm.
is awesome, and that I really appreciate that they did that because it is extra effort, it is extra time. It can also be kind of seen as unfair because others didn't get this opportunity. But if this is going to be your strategy going forward, then that kind of evens out over time. Um, but yeah, some of them just did you see that didn't make it to final category? One of those, I bombed the coding exercise. It was not a complex thing, but it wasn't a take home either. It was a surprise. Here's your problem. Now you can go off Zoom and come back when you're done. So I thought that would help with the whole like live coding thing. It did not help at all. And just like looking at the amount of code I produced in that amount of time and knowing that it both did not make the solution, nor did it have things like tests or the thing that you kind of expect. I was just like, yeah, I wouldn't hire me either. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that pain. So obviously, as I mentioned myself, I was in consulting for a very long time, which kind of took me away from a lot of the, hands-on coding every day kind of
Mhm.
thing, which made it very hard for when I started to then, I want to be an individual contributor. I want to be working on like really hard problems and writing code every day if I can. And then I started to do the interviews, and the only one which I actually did quite well on was the take home, like go home, build something, and then send it in. That's the only time out of probably like 6 live coding challenges that I went on was the only one that I actually passed on. So I think the accommodation thing is super critical for, you know, definitely because obviously everyone comes from different streams. There's some people that are, a lot of people want to hire just security engineers that have some security knowledge versus someone that has a more plethora of security background compared to like the actual hands-on coding side. So can totally understand, and that's totally understandable. The market is massive right now. People want very particular, what they're hiring for. It's very particular.
Yeah.
So I can definitely understand the difference, but I do love the, I think I've never personally asked, can you accommodate this? Like, I think if I ever do go for another interview, I think I probably will start asking those questions.
I guess it's a good point to call out someone else who I think helped me in this whole job search. Um, it's an older GitHub, not older, but a former GitHub colleague as well. Um, Muan, I don't want to mispronounce her last name, but she also wrote about her recent job hunt, and she's also like, don't let's not do live coding." And I think that the two of us, when she was kind of explaining like why she doesn't do it, I was like, "Oh, that's why." And then kind of like you can obviously like frame it in a biased way that really makes it seem like a terrible waste of time, but she said that she refused to do them and that people made accommodations. So she also kind of like she had some more requirements than I did too, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I did link to her blog post in one of my blog posts if people can hunt it down. It's a really good post. She's a really smart person, and I guess I'm really glad she wrote that article.
I'll definitely be sharing all of this on the on other YouTube segment when it gets posted up to there. So obviously, you talked on your blog about the perfect job interview. And obviously we've talked about the coding challenge versus take home, but you also talked about like setting boundaries and like, the balance between the interviewer and the interviewee. Can you talk about some of those aspects?
Um, yeah, so like obviously I phrased it as the perfect interview for me specifically,
Yeah.
like, and I think the first sentence says like, I know the world doesn't revolve around me. I'm just explaining what would be perfect for me, and maybe it resonates with other people. So yeah, take home, non-negotiable. Um, like no, not once in my life has my boss said, "Hey, next week at this time, I'm going to give you a surprise problem. You don't get to think about it ahead of time, and if you don't solve it, you don't work here." Um, I don't think that's happened in my career. I would love to know if someone else had that happen to them. Um, so yeah, if I have the time I can devote to this take home exercise, I will do it and I will enjoy it. And honestly, it was a take home exercise for a security role that made me realize, no, I just want to write code all day. Because I had such a good time doing it. It was my first time like writing code in like over a year, it felt like, and it just felt so good. And I over engineered the shit out of it. It was I created a full on library, like it was the GitHub repo was set up. I pull requests from, I'm talking to myself, and really just kind of went all out on it and really enjoyed it. So kind of, if I were to take all the interviews I've had, both the good and the bad, and kind of put them into one place, kind of some of the most important things I would say was, you know, you have to have a good problem description. Some of these were kind of like, I don't think this is fully specified. Like, I kind of have some questions, and then one was even like, well, that's part of the exercise. This is purposely ambiguous, and kind of like, uh, okay, like I think that's a bad idea. Like the problem should be well defined. It doesn't need to be like spelled out like letter to the letter, and it doesn't have to be like what's two plus two, but like a moderately complex problem with a good explanation of what it should do. Sample input, sample output. Not a full test suite, but at least something I can just like sanity check the base case. Um, you know, uh, if you're hiring for a specific language, maybe like create a skeleton for me. Like create a gem structure and using your testing framework and your linting tools and your way of like testing things so that I can just run a command and immediately see like a test failure so I can build off of that. Because one of the things, especially in the first one, is like, how do I use Ruby again? Like, how do you build a gem? Like, what's the convention here? And so it was kind of, I spent some time like relearning how to do some things I hadn't done in a long time. And you could say that's part of the interview, I guess, but I don't think that's the point. I don't think the interview was the problem, not whether or not I can use this library that I used to be familiar with.
There was people
Um,
on Twitter recently that also said something along the lines of like, I'll use JavaScript as the example. Like they know how to write, JavaScript applications, but building a web app from the ground up is basically nearly impossible in their eyes these days because of how complex like the general like build process is and setting everything up. So I totally agree with you when it like there needs to be like the foundations in place to allow someone who's already nervous to succeed. So yeah.
So if I was to go back how GitHub did it is like, yeah, we basically had this private repo and it had everything you needed except for the actual implementation and thorough test coverage. It had actions set up. So as soon as you pushed, you would know whether or not it was green. Um, and I think that that really helped people. One of the people I hired right before I left, he was a security person going back into coding, um, and he didn't know Go and he didn't know Ruby, and that's what our tests were in. But because he, can program, and because he can pick up, basic programming techniques in a short amount of time, he didn't have to worry about like how does Go run tests? What is the directory structure that it expects? Like how do you make a class? Like what are the conventions? It was like fill in this implementation, which tells us you know how to think, you know how to learn, but maybe you're not a fully internet programmer because that was what we were trying to get after. Um, and then you have to like really like dig into like this isn't real life part of the live coding exercise. Um, how someone uses GitHub is very important to me. How do they communicate in a pull request? How do they ask questions? How do they respond to questions? So while I did okay on this take home exercise, I definitely would not say I passed it, mm, which is not really important. But the thing I really liked about that one is they invited me to a private Slack. The people I'd be working with were there, and I could ask questions, and I could get answers asynchronously. Mhm. And instead of just like submitting a zip file of my project, like they had me create a pull request to show what it would be like if I was at a pull request. And they would go in there and they would ask, not like they didn't actually want the answers to these questions, but like what would you do if sort of thing in the context of the pull request. Um, I do kind of like that sort of like word problem aspect to it. And one of the other interviews like literally said like, okay, this is a word problem, submit your answer. But doing all of that within the context of Slack and GitHub and a pull request just felt so much more real. And I felt like it just revealed so much more information than if, we're doing a live coding exercise, we're pairing, but you can't actually help me or give me the answer too much. And the problem has to be small enough that it can't overwhelm someone. So it's a little bit like 2 + 2 = 4 to some degree. And I'm gonna spend half the time Googling. So like let's just skip all that and show what it would be like in real life. Um, or if we can only do this an hour, let me just talk about it from a high level. Let's not worry about whether or not I had the right number of brackets on the end of something, but can I describe to you what I would have done, what I would have considered, what problems I might have run into, what I would have done to like either prevent those problems or like know that I was going down a bad path. Because yeah, that coding exercise that I didn't do so well on, I really coded myself into a corner, and the only way out was to start over from scratch because I did not keep testability in mind from day one. And I generally don't have a lot of trouble retroactively doing that, but it happens. And this was one of those times. So I was really, it's like, I get it.
So yeah, I think that's definitely. I also like got into that place too, where there was basically this giant request, but before and like they wanted you to like export things to Excel, like that you can use a library to that. But before you actually made it to actually the easy part, where you're just taking like JSON data or an object and converting it into something else, the actual task beforehand was so complex, where it was just kind of like someone who wasn't an individual contributor who was actually like doing leak code every day and stuff wasn't going to be able to do it. So I totally like appreciate that, especially when you can do things, asynchronously, rather than like, having that direct conversation, because you might be able to sit back and think about the problem. And if you have that time, I think that's super important. There's a few things that I want to ask, and I know we're over time, but just the work, obviously, for a lot of people, especially when they're coming into like security jobs, the work-life balance is kind of really troublesome to begin with, because one, you're trying to get up to speed. Two, there's lots of incidents, especially when you're working for a product team, especially for companies that are in a bit of a less mature state. They kind of expect you to work longer. What would you kind of recommend people think about, at least when it comes to like work hours, making sure you don't burn out with vacations, and obviously um, remote first, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
My stepdad comes from a world where employees are interchangeable. All that matters is the bottom line, and that employees should be thankful they have a job. And I think that's kind of a culture that's going away. And I think a lot of tech companies, I think, might have been early to sort of adopt that sort of thing and sort of realize that like, why are you going to kill yourself over a job? Um, you know, time and time again will show you that working your butt off for a company will not pay off in the end. It might make you look good. It might help you get like a promotion, but if you're working harder than you can, you're eventually going to have problems. And unfortunately, like the problems when they manifest themselves aren't like in small, insignificant ways. Like you start like shutting out your family, your friends, and the people that are like most important to you, just because you think like, oh, if I work late tonight, I can get this project out and it'll make me look good, and I hit my deadlines or something like that. And um, I think that those days are gone. Um, you know, most of the time you haven't made a public commitment for things, so like, why are deadlines a thing? And I think even though it was written about like 30 years ago, like throwing more people onto a project to like make it go faster is only going to just like make things worse. So like, let's figure out how quickly we can go. Let's do that consistently, and then let's make sure that we're not like, either working on the wrong thing or working too hard. And I had worked at places where they said, let's come in on Saturday to get this done. And then I worked at places where I actually had a manager that said, don't you dare tell my employees to come in on a weekend. They don't work on the weekends. They don't work at night. They work when they work, and that's their life. And that was kind of the first time I was like, oh, that's a bit extreme, but like, I don't disagree. Um, and then, yeah, GitHub was like, it was like a new world to me. It was just like they really cared about the employee. They really wanted to make everyone like, it was a remote company, so you had to feel like included and comfortable, and everyone had to be like really nice to each other. And um, you know, top down things like vacation and healthy working hours were like expected. Um, you know, we had a a unlimited vacation policy, but we actually more practiced the minimum vacation policy. Like, I didn't take time off. My manager was like, you know, do this or else sort of thing, um, which was really weird because I had been in an unlimited vacation policy and I didn't take any. So I am exactly like the poster child of the problem of that system. Um, and then, yeah, like GitHub was a distributed company. My team was in 4 different time zones across the US. I worked with people in Europe very frequently. I worked with people in APAC very frequently. And it's kind of all asynchronous, and kind of everyone's like very empathetic about kind of their everyone's different experiences and kind of respecting everyone's boundaries. But also, like, we had a guy that was working on a biphasic sleep schedule, which I don't remember the details, but it's like you sleep for 4, then like you stay up for 3, then like you sleep for 4, and then so
Right.
it was a very odd schedule, but that was fine at GitHub because that's just how we worked. So kind of allowing everyone's day-to-day activities. And if you had to go pick up your kids from school, or if you needed to go to the grocery store or get an oil change, like, it didn't matter that you weren't in your computer at this specific time for this many hours. It's just like, did you get your stuff done? Cool. How are you feeling? Good. All right. Maybe celebrate. Maybe like take a few days off. Like, don't jump right into the next thing, or don't feel like you need to be here from 9 to 5. And if you're not at your desk, like, you're gonna get a finger shaken at you. Just like, be an adult, get your stuff done, be available for others, communicate with others, communicate progress, you know, get involved when you can, but like, otherwise, you're on your own. Do whatever you want and do what makes you happy.
Absolutely love that. Obviously, I've started a new role too, and I've kind of seen similar aspects, right, and how it makes people successful. I was ill one day. I said I couldn't work, and I actually was ill for like an entire week, and someone just took over my responsibilities for that week, which was very unheard of for me, because normally it's like I have all the knowledge and context in my mind, like no one else has it, and even though they didn't, they were like, I'll figure it out, it's fine. And then you have these things where one of my colleagues currently is on paternity leave, and they get a, they're basically their manager was like, if you log in and I see you communicating on Slack, we're going to revoke your AD. So just don't log in. Please, like, spend time with your child. So I think it's really important that obviously not everyone has the luxury when they're first starting out to be able to find those types of positions, because you just need to break in. But
Mhm.
once you start to kind of like, understand where you want to go, I think it's really, really important to start thinking about like what's important to you. And I think, obviously from all this, I think that's kind of like, even the things we're talking about right now, some people might want to just constantly work, and that's fine. Um,
Fine.
but I totally kind of, I love that you were able to like, walk me through your process, because it, everyone has different perspectives.
Yeah. The way I've kind of been phrasing it when I'm talking to employers is, do you have a sustainable work culture? Like, there are busy times, there are crunch times, and there's slow times, but like you have to be able to work the same through all of them and then come out the same on the back each time. And if people didn't know what I meant when I said sustainable, it was a huge red flag. Um, because it was like these were like this like we're a startup. Like you have to work as many hours as we say whenever we want, and I'm like, okay, goodbye.
Thank
Good
you for
luck.
your
But and
time.
again, good for them. Like if that's what they need and it works, good for them. But I've also talked to startups with that GitHub attitude, and they've still only got 10 employees, and they're still only got one customer, and they're still trying to push out a great product, but they know that that can go bad, and there's so many downsides to doing that. And if you're worried about missing your product's opportunity, then I get it. But if you want to build a sustainable company, you got to focus on that.
Totally get it. There's obviously like loads of things you could say there, and obviously I think even the customers of those, of those companies that have that better balance probably also kind of, see them as people that probably can, help them also with their own components. So I think it's, I definitely have seen, people that try and churn things out generally tend to, have less, better success with like business relations too. So
But at the same time, don't get me wrong. Like sometimes I want to write code all Friday night,
yeah,
but it still would have to be my choice.
exactly. And on that note, I think that was a great time to stop. So Neil, thank you so much for today. I've actually loved this entire conversation. It's been pretty. So even today about learning about the coffee beans and stuff, loved it. So thank you so much, and I'm hoping everyone enjoyed it today on the Twitch stream. This will be uploaded on YouTube today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, this was episode 15 of Security and Crumpets. Check us out next time for episode 16.